Hello creeps, Andy here, and today I have my reading wrap up for the month of April. So these are the books that I read this month, and we're going to go through them and talk about them, and I'll give you a little bit of information on each of them. I apologize that my videos haven't been that consistent. I'm trying to go back to uploading 3 times a week, but I haven't been feeling great lately, so it's been a little bit of a challenge, but just give me another week or two and we'll get it all sorted out. So for right now, let's talk about our reading wrap up. Please feel free to leave your favorite books that you read this month down below. And here are the books that I've read. So the first one is Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. I did talk about this one, in the last book haul. So you may have seen this one on my channel before, but this is about a young girl that goes missing and then kind of her family's life after her disappearance. Her mother and father split up and how her siblings react to the situation, but it really does focus more on her mother's life after, how she's coping. She ends up meeting a man and dating him and finding that his daughter really reminds her of her daughter at that age. It's actually like a pull on your heartstrings type story. I definitely cried at certain parts of this. It was really sad, but it was well written and an enjoyable thriller, I think, and one that I probably wouldn't have expected to like as much as I did, but I think because Lisa Jewell just has a hold on me. I mean, her books really are incredible, so I really did enjoy this thriller, and yeah, I would definitely recommend that one to anybody who's looking into thrillers. The next one that I read, my friends, is The Cellar by Richard Lehman. Holy crap, I loved this book. Before I recommend it to anybody though, know that it will not be for everybody. I think I took notes on this one. It has a lot of sensitive topics, so if you don't like things involving kids, just stay away from this one. But if you're willing to read stuff that is like vile, disgusting, crude, then you might enjoy this one. I was really surprised by this one because it is an older book. I think it was written in the 80s, 1980. So around the same time as some of these other books that I've read. I think maybe, was The Fog written in the 70s? Yes, actually, I don't know what that says. I can't read my own writing, but I think it says 1975. So around the same era. And so I went into this one thinking that I would probably like it as much as I liked The Fog, which I didn't hate that book by any means, but it did kind of feel like it was maybe more enjoyable at that time reading it versus now as a modern audience reading it, if that makes any sense. I think the people that wrote that they loved The Fog maybe read it when they were younger and it's like a nostalgic type book, but I don't know, maybe I could be completely wrong. But The Fog didn't hold my attention the way that The Cellar did, and I fucking loved this. So this is about a mom and a daughter who are on the run from this woman's convict ex-husband. He has been released from jail after doing some horrible things to their daughter, and he is tracking them. So that's kind of the basis of the story. But then you have this separate story kind of running parallel with it about this actual beast in this house, and there are tours and they show you go in and you can see where this beast has killed people throughout the years. So you have this interesting dichotomy of this actual beast versus this human who's evil, and you get to kind of weigh and judge which one's worse. Yeah, I wrote that it's crude, vile, and not for everyone, or for anyone that will be easily disturbed with any sort of kid stuff, because it does go into detail and it is hard to read at some parts. I will say that the mom pissed me off in this story, but I don't know if that was poor character development or if that was a sign of the times. For example, I already told you they're on the run from her ex-husband who is trying to harm their daughter, okay? And then they'll go to a hotel and she'll be like, just stay here. I'll go run and do some stuff. And I'm like, lady, you know someone's after you. What is happening? But again, like, this was in the 80s and I know that parenting was a lot different then. So I don't know. Let me know if you guys think that that's more of just like how things were back then, or if this mom just sucked. But she did piss me off a lot. She made a lot of really poor decisions, but it did not ruin the story and it did not make me hate her as a character. I still really enjoyed the ride. I wrote, come on, mom. I said it was enjoyable, fast-paced, and it was honestly suspenseful at times. I was actually really surprised at how engaged I was in the story and how stressed I was at some points reading it. So I will say that I don't know if it's labeled as like extreme horror, but it's definitely more extreme than a typical horror book, especially dealing with more sensitive subjects. I really enjoyed this one. I thought this was really fantastic. And so if you guys have Richard Lehman recommendations for me, please let me know your favorite down below. I went into this not having high hopes at all. I thought it was going to be about as enjoyable as The Fog, and I loved this one way, way more. Not to say that I didn't enjoy The Fog, but I really loved this one. It kept me engaged the entire time. Also, the ending, oh, brilliant, amazing. I loved it. I thought it was so fun, unexpected, great, fantastic book, but again, will not be for everybody. The next one, I did a whole video on this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is The Necrophiliac by Gabrielle Whitcop. I will link that video down below if you're interested in reading this one. This one, again, pretty messed up. Also does deal with kids, and I'm sure you can guess what it is by the title of the book, but it is this man, and it's kind of written in journal type format of it's written in journal format of his kind of extracurricular activities in the corpse department, and it just is written so fucking beautifully. It's pretty messed up at times, but it's also really goddamn beautiful. I mean, this one, again, I wouldn't recommend to everyone, especially if you're sensitive to like kid stuff. This one, it doesn't go into crazy detail, but it's kind of the stuff between the lines that bothers you more than the actual words written on the page. But it is written so fucking beautifully. I think that there's something to get out of it. Again, watch that video if you haven't, if you want a little bit more information on this, but holy crap, I love this book. It was such a fucked up story told in such a beautiful way. I mean, this is what I live for in literature. This is like my type of writing right here. So absolutely adored that one. The next three books I'm not going to go into because, again, I made a video on them, which were the most offensive book titles I could find. So there's this one by Urs Ullmann. This book may or may not be about this subject. And then we have this book. This is My Vagina Smells Like Sulfur. This is by C. Commissar. This is about a group of people that make snuff films on the dark web, and then it also kind of turns out to be more of like a revenge kind of story. A lot of brutal stuff happens in that one. And then I do have Irene's that I also read, and I can't even tell you what that book is about. You'll have to watch that other video because there's just, what the heck did I read? Still can't figure out who has syphilis. But anyways, next I read Monstrilio. This is by Gerardo Simano Cordova. And this one, I read the first line. It says, after her son dies, I don't know if it's Magos maybe, carves out a small piece of his lung to save for herself. I read that line and I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a book about grief. This is going to destroy me. I'm going to love every page of this. So I immediately bought it, and it was actually at the book club with my best friend this month. So we both read it. And yeah, it was really an interesting story told very uniquely, but it was not at all what I expected, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But you know, when you're expecting one thing and then you get something else, you can still enjoy the read, but you're like, oh, that was not at all what I thought it was going to be. But basically, yeah, it's about this husband and wife. They lose their son. The mom cuts out a piece of his lung and tries to grow something from him. And then the story continues from there, and it's over a long period of time. And it is about grief. Like, obviously it's about grief, but I thought it was going to destroy me. You guys know I love books that hurt so good. Like, I want to cry when I read a book about grief. I think that's why I reach for books that are about grief, because I want to read how I feel put into words by someone else. It's like a universal feeling that I'm sure that we all have felt, and it's so fucking gratifying when someone else nails exactly how you feel about something that's so hard to describe. And so I think that's why I love books like that, but I want them to hurt. I do. But this one wasn't really like that. There were a few sentences, a few quotes in here that I was like, oh, okay, yeah. But this did not pull at me the way that I thought it would. And here's why. It's kind of broken into two separate stories that are different but circle Monstrilio, which is this little monster created from the lung of this dead child. So you do have the grief aspect, and it is a very interesting kind of snapshot on how people deal with grief differently. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I really did like seeing how the characters not only dealt with the situation, but also dealt with each other's dealings of the situation. Grief is such a personal thing, and so it was really interesting. I've got to find a new word, but it was really interesting to kind of see how the characters dealt with not only their own grief, but how other people dealt with the grief. It was also important discussion on how grief is a process for a group of people. It affects that person who is grieving, but it also affects everybody in the circle around that person that's grieving, you know? So anyways, of course it's about grief, and really interesting story, super unique idea. I am always looking for something that is unique and out of the ordinary, and this book was that. So in that sense, I loved it. There were a lot of quotes that I highlighted in here as well, because the writing was just really unique. Her son was alive and now he isn't. No thunder, no angels weeping, no cloaked death, no grace. Just his silent body unbreathing and the blunt realization that this is it. And then like at one point she says, my son dies, and he said, he did, my beautiful girl, but you didn't, did you? So you know what I mean? There are definitely quotes in here that pull on your heartstrings a bit, but I did think this book was going to destroy me, and it was a lot less intense than I thought it was going to be. Needy to love someone who wouldn't disintegrate, you know? So yes, really unique concept. However, there's another portion of the story that I think is way more about sexuality and coming into yourself, like growing into yourself and coming to realize what you deserve and to be happy and things like that. And it almost felt like two separate books put together. And I didn't really know how to take Monstrilio's part in the second part of the story, because obviously it's very evident in what he has to do and why he's involved in the first part. And I guess it does make sense in a roundabout way, especially the ending of the story. But some of the parts of sexuality and just like becoming who you are, I was like, but what does that have to do with the dead son? So there were definitely some connections that perhaps I failed to make in this story. And it did almost kind of feel like two very unique plot lines wrapped around this Monstrilio character. But obviously if you guys have read this, let me know what I missed to connect those two things. I'm sure there's a reason why it's like this, you know? Yeah, I don't know. Let me know how you guys feel about this one. Not at all what I expected. Still intriguing and an interesting ride. And I will say I will absolutely pick up more of his work in the future because it was such an enjoyable experience. The next book that I read was The Bad Seed by William March. And this is a movie that my family had watched when I was really young, and they always quote this movie. I don't think I've ever seen it. I think they watched it when I wasn't there one time, but they always quoted it and they always talk about how creepy the movie is. Anyways, I got this from a family member to read, and so I read it now. It's about this little girl that's just evil. She's a bad seed, and her father's out of town, and her mom's kind of coming to the realization of what her daughter is while still wanting to protect her. Oh, you know what? I think I took notes on this one as well. One moment. I don't know where my folder is. And of course I can't find the folder that I took notes in. I'm so bad. Why do I not just take notes in my reading journal? That's where everything should be so it doesn't get lost. Anyways, so she's stuck in between protecting her blood, her flesh and blood, and then also being very fearful and not wanting other people to get hurt or manipulated by her daughter. And she is such an interesting character because she plays like she's this dumb idiot that doesn't get anything, but when it comes down to it, she knows exactly what she's doing. And so I actually really liked the story from the mom's perspective. I thought it added a lot to the narrative. They have this neighbor who's like obsessed with therapy, and so she brings a lot of psychology into conversations. Yeah, there's a little bit of, I think, deeper meaning in conversations like that. Then they have another person in the neighborhood that he's kind of obsessed with true crime stuff, so that kind of gets involved in it. And then you have the aspect of the missing father and this woman like, oh, I'm so dumb, I can't make decisions on my own. but then her daughter's doing horrible things and she's like, oh no, it's probably not her. It's just a very interesting tale. Here's what I will say though. It was written in the 50s, I believe, 54. And you feel like it was written in 54. It's not the most fluid, engaging way that a story has ever been written for a modern day audience. And it's so, again, interesting when you think about books, because you can read a book from 100 years ago and it can hold your attention and feel like it's for a modern audience. And then sometimes you come across these books where you're like, oh, this was written in the 50s. You could just tell. What I would compare this to is, have you seen the movie What's Wrong with Baby Jane, or Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? That old black and white film. I watched it with my mom 100 years ago. And through the movie I was like, okay, so you know, it's a little old. It's maybe not for a modern audience, but then you get to the end and you're like, okay, that was worth the read, or the watch in that case. But there was something about it that just didn't hold my attention as much as a normal book was, and I don't know what it is. Like, let's just read the first paragraph together and maybe you guys could get a sense of what I mean. And maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe you guys will love this. But it says, later that summer, when Mrs. Penmark looked back and remembered when she was caught up in the despair so deep that she knew there was no way out, no solution whatever for the circumstances that encompassed her, it seemed to her that June 7th, the day of the Fern Grammar School picnic, was the day of her last happiness. For never since then had she known contentment or felt peace. It's just kind of written in an old school type way. And I don't even know what I mean by that, but I'm hoping that you understand what I mean by that. So still an enjoyable read. Would recommend it. Just kind of like a creepy, fun little story. There's a few creepy parts in here. And also there's another character named Leroy that I absolutely fucking loved in the story. He's like the groundskeeper at the apartment building that this little girl lives at. And they're kind of rivals, but also he also has this like weird creepy obsession with her. The characters are just fantastic in this story. And so I will watch the movie and see how I feel about that. And maybe I'll do a movie verse book, because I did take notes somewhere and maybe it would be worth doing that. Let me know what you think. But anyways, there's that one. Still enjoyed it, but was definitely different than I expected. I guess it's my expectations. I gotta just keep them at a base level before I go in. Then I read New York Cheesecake Chaos by Addison Moore. This is that cozy mystery romance type story that I read once a month. And this was the April version of this book, took place in April. The same thing happens, you know, it's just a baker. She finds a dead body. Well, first, before she finds a dead body, she sees a ghost of a pet. And so she knows somebody will be murdered. And then she tries to figure out who it is based on the pet. She finds the dead body, the police investigate, but she always solves the crime first because she's smarter than the police. And the story has definitely taken on a lot more additional aspects than the first few. I think this is number 8 in the series, and it took a while to get here, but I didn't mind just like the same stuff told over and over, because it's just like a silly cozy mystery, you know? But this one, you had like everybody's ex coming into town, which was a really unique experience with these characters. You also have this love triangle between these two ex-stepbrothers and our main baker here, which adds a lot of spice to it. So you have that, and then you have this whole addition of her seeing these ghosts, and she's questioning where she came from and what she really is. And there's just a lot of stuff going on in the story. There's 52 of these books in total, and I will read them all. I promise you that. I've already, because after I finished that one, I loved that one so much, I've already bought May's and June's. So this is Lethal Lemon Bars, and this is Macaron Massacre. So excited for those. Going from the necrophiliac to a cozy mystery is kind of fucking wild, but I love it. I love having variety in my reading. And I love that I can read really dark, disturbing stuff and then just like fun, cutesy stuff to cleanse the palate and move on to the next messed up thing, you know? And the last thing that I read this month, by the way, this is probably going up a few days before the end of the month, but I just started a book that is actually so challenging to read. That's probably going to take me all month to read, so I know I'm not going to finish it before the end of the month. But the last thing that I read this month is Tess Gerritsen's Body Double. These are the thriller books that Rizzoli and Isles is based on. They were written, I think, in the early 2000s. The first one is The Surgeon, and this is the fourth in the series. And this and The Surgeon, I think, are my number ones. I fucking loved this. So you have Rizzoli and Isles, and Rizzoli's a detective, and Maura Isles is a medical examiner. So she is the one that cuts all the bodies and takes out their organs and stuff. So what happens is a woman is killed by her house. The back tells you this, so I'm not giving anything away, but it happens to be her twin sister, but she didn't know she had a twin sister. And at first I was bummed that the back gave that away, but the story is so much more than that. And so you have a lot of complex themes going throughout. Like, you definitely have facing your own mortality in here throughout the entire story. You also have, again, kind of like the coming to terms with who you are and what you are. You also have a lot of themes of like pregnancy, rebirth, like that as well. And so there's a lot to take from this story. This is one of the best thrillers I've ever read. Yeah, I always forget to mention these books when I'm talking about thrillers, because in my head, they're honestly like a Silence of the Lamb type story. And I don't understand why Silence of the Lamb is a horror book and these are thrillers, because they seem so much alike to me. They both could be considered horror and thriller. There's definitely a crossover. So a lot of the times I just categorize The Surgeon specifically as a horror book. I mean, that one gets into detail, but if you guys want just like a fun series, I would highly suggest these. Don't start with number 4. I would start with number 1 because that one's fantastic too. You know what? I'm gonna do a whole separate video, not just on these, but maybe on all the series that I'm reading, to go into a little bit more detail, because this video is already so freaking long. You guys hear me just talk about books for like an hour. I don't know how you do it. But anyways, that book was so fucking enjoyable to me. I loved it. I did not see it coming. You know how a lot of the times the thriller aspect, the killer is so predictable. This one was not predictable. I did not see it coming. I also just really enjoyed the whole investigation on what was going on with the sister, as well as some other things. It was just a really cool way to wrap everything together. I loved that one. I thought that was a blast. So those are the books that I read. I mean, talk about variety. So let me know what your favorite book of the month was. Thank you so much for just listening to me ramble about books. This is honestly my favorite thing to do. I love books. I appreciate you guys being here. And if you want to see what I'm reading currently, I will see you on Instagram or Goodreads. And other than that, I'll see you soon with another horror video. Okay, thanks, bye!
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.